Hi everyone, welcome. What you see out here on the bench is my bin of mixed red worms. And when I refer to the mixed red worm population, I'm referring to a combination of red wigglers, European night crawlers, and Indian blue worms. A combination of worms that work really well together. And the system's been in service now for 323 days, for quite some time. Over the course of 21 of the system's 27 feedings, we had conducted a sort of a ping-pong feeding pattern going from one side of the bin to the other. So 21 times we switched sides, and then it was 5 feedings ago, and today will be the 6th feeding when we're only feeding on one edge of the bin. So we went back and forth, and then we just settled on this side over here. I could tell it's this side because it's a little bit lower than the other side. So I suppose I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that it's this side of the bin that we've been feeding on. And by doing so, we've in effect set the system up to be managed as sort of a wedge. And the wedge is really just, suggesting that one side is perhaps bigger or smaller than the other side. And you can even sort of see that shape occurring here. And let's see, what else can we tell you about this system? So yeah, that whole wedge pattern started 66 days ago, so over 2 months now, since we decided to bring an end to the ping pong and initiate the wedge. So we got all these funny little words. And I guess another funny little word or words would be the concept of horizontal migration, because if you're going to just run the system as a wedge, in a way it's perpetual. It's always going to get fed on one side, and the worms are always going to be gradually making their way over there, and you're going to keep pushing the finished castings to the opposite side, and eventually you're going to need to just remove some stuff after you run out of space. But this system wasn't really meant to be run as a perpetual wedge. It was really just set up that way as sort of a demonstration of the wedge pattern. In my wormery, it's really more of a horizontal migration, if you want to think of it that way. And it's kind of interesting to see how many worms are over on this opposite side of the bin where we haven't fed for some time. When I watched the video from the last check-in, which was 20 days ago, it seemed to me like this opposite end of the bin, furthest from where the feedings have been getting applied, was almost worm-free, but it seems like the worms have possibly depleted that last feeding that they got, which consisted of a banana peel, some watermelon, and some coffee, which was placed over on that side. And maybe they've just sort of gone roaming around looking for other things to nibble on. So it's pretty interesting. Perhaps it's also because of the high humidity that we've had in my region lately. Perhaps for some time the side of the bin over here was getting a little bit dry and inhospitable, and that's the reason we would typically find more worms over on the side that we've been feeding. But perhaps due to the high humidity, this side of the bin might have started becoming a little bit more comfortable for the worms to spend time in. So I was a little caught off guard to find so many worms on this side of the system. I guess if we really wanted to see this system really take off as a horizontal migration, which would mean that we're trying to get the worms to depopulate this side of the bin and move all over to this side of the bin, then we might want to consider just leaving this side of the bin uncovered so that it can actually become drier and become material that the worms don't even want to be in. But you know what, I don't want to put this food down. I just figured I would show you what I was feeding them, but I've been holding it here in my hands for some time now. It's just an assortment. There's cantaloupe, there's green beans, there's the tops of peppers. I see a tomato in there. I think there was some apple peel and possibly some other stuff. A couple chunks of cucumber. It's a really nice assortment of different stuff that the worms are probably going to appreciate after not getting anything for 20 days. And that stuff that they got 20 days ago, that assortment of coffee and watermelon rind and a banana peel, could very well have been depleted by this time. So now, as I dug down there, my finger encountered a somewhat larger, tougher object, which from the look of it is probably half of an avocado pit. Seems like certain avocado pits just don't want to break. Oh, this one finally gave. But I bet you this thing's been in here for a couple months, and for it to take this long to break seems a little bit unusual. Usually they soften up in allow themselves to be busted a lot sooner than that. But before we make our way over to that feeding zone over on the opposite side, I figured I would just give this edge a little till, and especially since I'm finding a good many worms and moisture over on this side, I think it probably benefits the system to give it a good aeration. And perhaps if I encounter any other food scraps, I can continue moving them over to the side of the wedge that's really meant to be the side that we're feeding on, so that what we're left with on the opposite edge is, for the most part, castings only in the ideal world. But there is still a good many scraps of leftover stuff over within this material, as I keep finding, which it's actually a good thing that the worms are back over here picking off leftovers in this material, because that is the only way to end up with a really nice batch of material that's castings only and free of stuff, which is to, well, I guess in part for me to pick out things that I encounter along the way, but all the tiny little residue, the little food scraps and bedding bits that might still be floating around the system are most easily done away with by letting the worms nip that stuff off. I gotta say, I'm really quite surprised at how many worms are occupying this edge of the bin. I kind of wonder if perhaps the system's actually drawing moisture into itself due to the high humidity, because the system actually felt quite heavy when I lifted it up in order to bring it over to the bench. I was a little bit surprised, a little bit taken aback by just how heavy it was. I expected it to be a little bit dry with only paper coverings. I mean, during that last check-in 20 days ago, we left it with just a single sheet of newspaper covering it, but then I came back, I believe later that day, and I just threw an extra piece of newspaper on there. So you might have noticed when I was removing the top coverings, there was actually 2 sheets of newspaper covering the system. One that kind of went all the way around edge to edge, and a slightly smaller one that was more focused over the feeding area, so as to keep the feeding area nice and damp. But it seems like the entire system's got a fairly high degree of moisture in it. So it is fun to see how many worms are living in this system. There was a point in time when this population of mixed red worms actually came really close to dying off due to I don't know what. Something just went awry, and I was able to rescue a good many worms. Well, it wasn't even that many. We had to really work the population back up to a respectable size again, because their numbers really did diminish greatly during that issue, whatever that issue might have been. I can't remember, but that was quite a number of systems ago. So I guess every time I move the worms into a new environment, I kind of start the counter off, sort of like this system has been in service for 323 days. The worms were placed into a fairly small system, gradually increasing their numbers, getting to the point where we can move them into a somewhat larger system, and then they got moved into this bin, which was larger than the last bin that they were occupying. So I'm even thinking the next time I move these little guys from here into a new home, I have yet another style of bin that's a little bit bigger than this one. It's pretty much the same length, but a little bit wider. So I am thinking that due to the fairly large number of worms that live in this system, I might actually increase the size of their space to give them even more territory to occupy. I mean, just looking at what's going on here, I'm almost wondering if we could even split this population into 2 and launch 2 systems once it comes time to relocate them. I wouldn't be surprised if we'd be able to pull that off, because it sure seems to me like we've got a nice size population of worms living in here. So I'm just finding a couple more of these really tough seeds, which I'm assuming are avocado pits. I guess the one thing I'm still kind of rummaging around for is sort of similar to this right here. It's a stem of a pumpkin, but I thought there were 2 of them in here. Aha, there we go. Almost a moment after I made that statement, I managed to stumble on it. So I've pulled out all these food scraps from feedings gone by long time ago. As you can imagine, a gourd would take some time to break down, pumpkin stems for sure. And we'll position those objects right back down into the feeding zone, but before we do that, I think we'll begin by laying in a little bit of fresh bedding for these little guys so that we can give them some nice fresh material to roam around in, since what they've got here seems to be, for the most part, castings only, almost. We're getting close to it. So I think I'll let these little guys settle in a little bit first, and then we'll come in with some nice bedding. So now, besides my prepared bedding here, which we're going to lay down as sort of the foundation onto which we're going to put today's feeding, I've also got a number of napkins and paper towels. I think they're actually all napkins that I'd really like to do away with, so they're going to get a pretty generous helping of bedding type materials today. And if things go as I hope, I'll be able to do away with perhaps half a dozen or so napkins. So to that end, I think I'm gonna just sort of sparsely drop in a few bits of food here and there, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then come right back in with yet another piece of paper. I guess if I had just thrown all this paper in together at once, it would end up kind of matting together and just becoming a big clump that would most likely just sit there and remain there. But I think that by creating sort of a lasagna layered stacking approach here, the way we're doing, we're going to give this application of napkins and even the shredded paper cardboard leaf mixture on the very bottom a better chance at getting consumed as part of the feeding, although most people would probably consider this as bedding rather than part of their meal. And I figured this would be a good time to come right back in with some of these older objects that we encountered along the way before I forget about them. And at the end, I think that this coffee filter is still holding up well enough to be used once again as a feeding zone indicator. I believe last time it came in here brand new, so it's undergone a good bit of wear from having been in the worm bin over the past 20 days. Let's not forget a little bit of this grit too, before I forget, just in case they need it. And well, I've still got 2 or 3 more of these napkins I'd like to do away with, but I'm running out of food fast. Let's see what we could pull off here. This is going to be quite a generous feeding zone. Kind of makes me wonder if that's going to cause the worms to come running over to this side of the system again, kind of the way we found it last time. When we came in here last time, it seemed to me like the other end of the bin was almost worm free. And that was really my expectation today, that when we came in here I thought we would find virtually no worms over there. So when I started excavating over there just to check it out, I was actually caught off guard a little bit by how many worms we encountered. So, still got 2 more, but I think I'm just gonna plop in the remainder of the food I bought down here for them, and I'm not gonna try to do away with those last 2 napkins that I've got for them. I still want to be able to cover up. Perhaps I can even just come in with a little bit more of this stuff, just so the foods can be thoroughly covered, especially the real sweet, savory melon. I would hate to think that I'm attracting any sort of pests to the system by leaving a tasty morsel like that out near the surface. And I don't think we have to cover up too thoroughly, since we've got a nice layer of bedding over the foods. I got a feeling next time we come back in here, this feeding zone is going to be collapsed down again, just the way we found it today. And I really wouldn't mind seeing this system function a lot more as if it were actually undergoing horizontal migration. Meaning, at some point soon, I would like to haul these worms out and situate them in a new home. But that would mean this side of the bin would need to be pretty much depopulated. So I'm thinking perhaps the best way to make that happen would be to perhaps just leave this side of the bin uncovered. So I mean, we had two coverings. It was sort of like this when we first arrived. One covering going over the whole thing, and then a secondary covering over the feeding zone in the hopes to keep that side of the bin a little bit more damp. But at this point, I'm wondering if we might benefit from kind of folding over this larger piece of paper here. In effect, we've got double layer here, almost like quadruple layer here. Same on the corners where we've got double folds over. And then over here we've got like a double layer. Here it's only single, well no, it's actually double layer here. So it's 2 layers here, 2 layers here, sorry, 3 layers here. So we've got quite a few layers of paper, and that might be part of the reason we're seeing so much of the moisture remain in this system and isn't evaporating away and drying off. So perhaps by doing it this way, we'll start to see this side of the bin dry off a little bit, possibly motivating the worms to congregate over where we're feeding. So sort of a attraction slash repulsion approach, in the hopes that we can get the worms to kind of come together over here, and at some point maybe we can start hauling them out. But right now, just the way the worms are all over the place, doesn't seem like that would be likely. So this might be a good start to really see that sort of an action. So technically, I've really been considering this system as being in horizontal migration for the past 66 days, ever since we configured it as a wedge. But it seems like we're really nowhere near depopulation of the system. Last time it seemed like we were, but for whatever reason, the worms will do what they will do. So that's it for our check-in with the mixed red worms. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before I go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.